behind you.
Hi, AJ.
No?
This is just a bit about my life, if that's all right, and what I've been going
Not
through.
too much about your life because we want to focus on a question, but just give a little.
Just generally.
Yeah.
Recently, I've had I won't go into detail, but it's sort of an ending of a relationship.
Yeah.
I've also had a lot of felt realisations of, I had a very controlling, dominating mother. I had a father that was completely abandoning, and I've realised that I've spent my entire life looking like a desperate need for love.
From a woman in particular?
Particularly from a woman.
Yeah.
I've, felt the pain that as much as I've looked, I've never really found it, because everyone that I've been attracted to has really been there to reflect the feelings of lack of self-love.
So most of the women you've been attracted to have been women who demonstrate a lack of love for you generally?
Yes, most generally, and I have been the pleasing type man sexually, etc., etc.
You do everything possible to please?
To please.
And
obviously there's something that happens at the beginning of the relationship, which is that addiction thing that gets met, and then as the relationship proceeds, I found that the love that I would have liked or have been seeking has not ever been there.
Yeah. And that makes you do less, does it? You find, or do you do more?
This is getting the crux of it.
Yeah.
My mother passed away a couple of years ago.
Yep.
And with this relationship ending, it's created an enormous amount of terror in me.
Yeah.
Fear. A lot of grief about who's going to love me. I will never be loved. And I've realised that with this one ending, it's almost like there's no support. All of a sudden, there was always the mother in the background, even though another state.
So can I describe to you what you've been doing? So here is yourself, Mark.
Yeah.
It's Mark with a C, isn't it?
That's correct, yeah.
And you've had your mother always alive up until a few years ago, so this is Mum. And you would go and find another relationship with a woman, I gather.
Yes.
And when that relationship wasn't satisfying all of your emotional addictions that you needed to get met, you still had Mum to go and get the rest done.
Yes.
Is that how it works? Yep. And to be honest, that's how most people's lives work. Most people's lives work like that. They have a parent. Usually it's an opposite. Sometimes it's the same gender parent, but usually it's an opposite gender parent. So it could be mum or dad. So we should just write there instead mum or dad.
Mm-hmm.
And when these people here do not satisfy all of the emotion, instead of looking to complete this relationship and have this relationship satisfy all emotions, right? Most people give up on that and they go, right, oh, well, she's never going to do that. So what I'll do is I'll get that one from mum. And she's never going to give, she'll give me that one, so that one's a back and forward. She'll give me that one's a back and forward. So one of them might be respect. She's never going to respect me, let's say.
Okay.
And so I get my respect from mum. So mum gives me respect. But she does give me approval when I do certain things. So I enter that addiction. Right? And I don't need that from mum now because I'm getting it from her.
Yes.
Right? And so forth. We can list lots of different emotions. Yep. And so when mum or dad dies...
And I've got both parents have died now, so...
The fallback position is gone.
Yes.
Now,
so what happened now is that the fallback position has happened, that was my fallback position, let's say. That's now gone
too.
So for the very first time in my life...
Mark is alone.
Mark is alone. In the last month to 2 months, for the very first time in my life, that's what I'm...
Yeah. How many of you are afraid of being alone, to be honest? Particularly in a permanent aloneness. The best way to see whether you're afraid of being alone is to choose to spend your Christmas alone. And then you'll see whether you're afraid of being alone or not. Do you understand why? Because that's the time everybody else is getting together with somebody else, So when you're alone doing it, it's a very interesting experience. So there's this feeling of aloneness. that needs to be experienced, obviously.
Yeah.
The reality is you're not alone.
This is what I'm getting at, because I can see the truths,
Yeah.
but there's still like these child trapped emotions,
Exactly.
which are still running things. So intellectually, and
So
from listening to
intellectually, remember the previous columns we had, intellectually, we could say number 2 is the truth about being, whether Mark's alone or not, is that Mark is not alone. He's loved by somebody. There's spirit friends that you've got that interact with you on a daily basis. God loves you. There's all this love available to you, but you can't feel it, right? That's the problem. It can't be felt, yeah? So when it can't be felt, that's when this feeling kicks in of I'm all alone, I'm terrible, like nobody loves me, nobody wants me, nobody cares about me. That's the feelings that kick in, right? So we can tell ourselves intellectually the truth that we aren't alone or that we are loved, but it's not going to hit us emotionally, Mark, until we process something. You can see that.
Yep.
Can I just enlarge a little bit about situations to also involve other people's, what's going on in their lives? When your mum or dad die, there is also the potential that your mum and dad are now in the spirit world but earthbound. So I'll just draw them here. They're still around you. Right? So for many people, not for yourself, Mark, because if it was happening for yourself, you wouldn't feel so alone. Right? But because there's blocks to the spirit world for yourself, you do feel very alone as a result of that. But they are still there, and if they were earthbound and they wanted to fulfill your addictions, they would often just sit on your shoulder, still giving you exactly the same emotional addictions that you were getting before.
Okay.
Right? So I know of many people who have passed who are just sitting basically right next to the person who was their son or daughter, still projecting exactly the same emotion at them that they were projecting at them when they were alive.
Yes.
And feeling that they're doing them a good deed doing so, because it helps the person not feel bad about themselves and so forth. Yep. Now, once these addictions start breaking down, this feeling of aloneness, which is a huge feeling in society, like the majority of people are terribly afraid of being alone.
Yep.
And so, in fact, the way we plan our world in the Western world, if you think about it, often we plan our world around not being alone for any extended period of time.
Yep.
Does that make sense? So we'll often go to work, but we don't want to go home to an empty house. So what do? We go around and visit a mate or a friend or, ex-partner even. That's better than nothing sort of feeling is the feeling we have. And so we go from that person, and then when they reject us or they feel like they're getting too much of us, we'll go to footy or we'll go somewhere else where we're together with a group of people and we don't have to feel alone. Or we go to a restaurant or whatever else. We do just so many things, and even a lot of our hobbies are not chosen because we love them, but because it gives us an opportunity to not be alone. Right?
Okay.
And what we need to choose to do is to firstly feel the fear of being alone.
Yep.
Yep. And then once we feel the fear of being alone, the grief about being alone. And so what you'll find is in your childhood, there were many times when even your mum and dad were standing right in front of you, but you actually felt alone.
No, I think I felt very alone all childhood. There
Exactly.
was complete non-recognition of any emotion or me.
Or of you, yeah.
At all. So it was complete
no
aloneness.
acknowledgement of the child.
Yeah.
Yeah. No acknowledgement of the personality. A lot of parents don't even acknowledge the personality of the child, the individual characteristics and nature of the child, and so forth. They just don't acknowledge any of those things. So the child grows up feeling totally alone, even though the parents are right in their face all the time. Yeah. And it's a feeling we need to actually feel to release.
And it's sort of, I'm okay at this second, but of late it's just continuous. It's just, and I'm happy that I've recognised, I've done the list of the addictions, I know what they are, and I'm really don't want to go to them. I want...
Well, there's two things that needs to happen. You're doing the first, which is to feel the error-based emotion.
which is the fear.
No, in the end, it's the grief that you are alone.
Okay.
Because the reality is that God is right next to you. You've got all these spirit friends near you. You're not alone. Even when you're physically by yourself, you're still not alone.
Okay.
Right? So that is the truth, but that's just an intellectual truth. It's not something you feel, right? So the first thing is to feel that you are alone. You need to go through the feeling, which you are doing. But the second thing you're very resistive to.
Okay.
All right? And many of us get very resistive about this. We need to feel the truth-based emotion.
Yeah, this is where I've been struggling. I know the truth, and how do I get that? How do I get the truth in and the error out?
Well, often the truth enters as the error leaves.
Okay.
So, sometimes it's just a matter of feeling the emotion longer before. So, for example, if it's an emotion of being alone and you were alone all of your childhood, you felt alone all of your childhood. So let's say for Mark, that was how long do you feel you ended your childhood? What age did you feel you ended your childhood?
Oh, God.
Just
Maybe mid-teens, let's say.
Okay, so let's say you were 15. You've got 15 years of alone to feel. Now, do you think you're going to get over that in one sitting?
No.
Definitely not. This is the other problem we have. We are very impatient, right? So when we engage in experiment of feeling our emotions, what do? We go through this process of impatience. We go, I want to be over this. This should be over. I've been feeling this for 1 week. It's too long now, right? Right? But we've had 15 years of it, and now we're hoping to be over it in 1 week.
Okay.
Right? So that's part of our problem. We want things to be finished before they're finished. And being finished is a natural process that we'll need to go through. Yeah.
So what about more about this feeling the truth one?
Well, can you see that while the error exists, it's going to be hard to feel the truth? So, and partly you're impatient with the emotion. So you want the emotion to be over, which doesn't allow you to feel it fully. Right?
Okay.
So allow yourself to feel the emotion fully. As you do that, but you will also need to come to feel about the truth itself. So what is the actual truth? Now, you're being told by me the truth, but you don't believe that, because if you believe that, you wouldn't feel alone.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it's okay to not believe these things. We need to still be open to accepting them. So we'd put that in the experiment basket. So the experiment is, so how do I actually get to finish up feeling the truth that I'm not alone? The experiment would be to experiment with who is with me. Experiment with connecting with them somehow. I'm talking about God and your spirit guides who are with you every single day. Experiment with the connection there.
I'm doing it with God. I tend to not...
You tend to not do it with your guides because you feel you're alone.
Yeah, okay.
And this is where you're not experimenting. You're not going, well, hang on a sec. If that's true, then I must have a guide. And if I've got a guide who's sitting with me every single day of my awake life, then he must know me. He must know me better than I know myself, right? And then on top of that, he must love me a lot to spend all of that time with me, right? So there's all that love that I'm shutting off, obviously. I can experiment with that now. I can start, okay, who are you? I can, and start off, I might start off doing all sorts of things. Like I might go to a medium and ask who's my guide, and they give me all the wrong answers. And, but I would experiment with the process until I can feel that this person's with me. Do you understand?
Okay.
Now, as I'm experimenting with this process, what's happening inside of me is I'm becoming more and more open to feeling the truth because I'm actually knowing the truth exists. You see, it's one thing for me to say to you, you've got God all the time available to you and you've got your spirit guide all the time available to you. I can say that, but it means nothing unless you can feel it. Isn't that true?
Yes.
Right? So it means nothing unless you feel it. Now, how do you feel it? Well, at the moment, you're not feeling it. So you've got to go through an experiment to feel it. So engage the process of experimenting with it.
Well, even the last couple of weeks, which I've really loved, there's been a desire to get to know God, like really genuinely
Get to know God.
God.
Yeah.
That's
And I would
that's
do
wonderful.
that with God and your guides, which are the two, God and your guides are a group of people who want to know you.
Okay.
They have seen the damage that's happened in your childhood. They understand everything about your life. They understand you very well, better than you understand yourself most of the time. And they want to get to know you. They want to help you through that process. And so part of this process would be don't trust what I've just said, but to experiment with it.
Okay.
Who is with me? Are there these guides really? Like AJ says, there's these guides, but I've
So what,
never...
even can you show me you exist, or
Yeah,
or help me
how-
do something, or
yeah.
I don't know, that sort of thing.
Give me some signs that you exist. So you could enter into a dialogue with them that will enable them to show you through a series of events that they're there,
Okay.
right? And you could ask them to engage this process with you, not to alleviate your fears, but rather just so that you can learn to accept the truth that people are with you who love you.
Okay.
Does that make sense? Now, what happens with most people on the New Age movement is they go, oh, I've got my guide and I've got a guardian. Oh, well, that's wonderful. I don't have to feel bad. That's not the purpose of this. The purpose of this is to help you accept the truth emotionally,
Okay.
not to avoid the grief emotionally, right? So in other words, we want to engage this process of experimentation not primarily for the purpose of just making yourself not feel alone anymore.
Okay.
Because that's dealt with by the first thing you need to do, which is to feel the error-based emotion. Feel the alone feeling. You need to do that still. But you also need to engage this second process as an experiment of feeling the truth as well. What is the truth about that? Am I actually alone? So when I did that, it took me like 5 years to work through that issue, just that one issue. Of course, I was working through other issues concurrently, right? Because I often do that. But I felt alone for many, many years, right? Until I could feel the people with me and feel God was with me. Then I didn't feel alone anymore. Now, there are still times when I feel alone, but I realise that it's just a feeling I need to feel because I've already gone through the truth that there are people with me and I know them and I've talked to them and so forth.
Because there's a lot of fear in that aloneness I've carried, like with my life, about survival, like I won't survive in the world.
Yes.
And like a sense of impending doom and things must come to an end. That's just been horrendous.
Yeah, no, most of the world has those feelings. The reason why we want family so desperately is because we do not believe that we are capable of supporting ourselves. And a lot of the time, the reason why we believe this emotionally is because we were taught that. We were taught that we were incapable of supporting ourselves emotionally and physically and, financially and so forth without some family assisting us.
And that's what my mother did. She basically made it that she kept me with her and disenabled me so that was what she did.
Exactly. And she did that because she believed that that's what she needed because she had the same feeling that she totally alone without you. And so what we finish up doing is we finish up growing up with this idea and concept that without family, we're dead.
Yeah.
Without
sometimes
family,
it's felt like I'm going to die.
Yeah, yeah. And this is an emotion that we do need to work our way through because the reality is we have God. Without God, you're dead, pretty much, right?
Yeah.
But once you got God, who else do you need? Like you've got the creator of the universe. Do you think you need anybody else? Not really, right?
Not really.
So once we understand that connection and feel that connection, now we have the ability to understand that we can never be alone, right? But we have to feel that because it's not going to be real inside of us until we can feel that. And we can't manufacture the feeling. We've got to experiment to discover the truth of it. You can't. I'm not suggesting to you that you just believe something down pat and then just delude yourself into a false sense of an emotion. That's not what I'm suggesting at all. That's why experimentation is so important. Without the experiment, you are never going to believe yourself.
Okay.
Without the experiment. You can have anybody tell you anything, and if you do not experiment, you will never believe them.
Until I feel it
Until
myself.
you feel it. You're never going to believe them.
So it's another question with regards to the fear and the grief.
Yep.
Like an awful amount of grief has come up with the relationship about the not being loved and the like, and it feels for me like the aloneness has sat under the grief of the relationship ending. So it's like I feel like I've done a lot of grief about the relationship part,
Yep.
but the aloneness part is bringing the fear. So is it a different grief?
Yep.
They're different griefs?
Totally
Yeah?
different grief. Yep. Because with some of your grief, you've been feeling your addictions, actually. Your addictions to a relationship. A lot of times up here, when we don't get addictions met, remember I said there's unhappiness as well as anger and frustration and annoyance.
Mm-hmm.
Unhappiness is like quite often we can cry, but we can cry about our addiction not getting met, right? When you start addressing the issue with mum and dad, now you're starting to address more of a causal issue associated with the true fears and grief associated with your relationship with them. So it's interesting, though, that you called the grief awful. Can you see what that does?
Yeah, I'm resisting. They say I want the willingness to feel these causal emotions. I'm still having a resistance to feeling them because I'm labelling it awful.
Well, it's not that you're labelling, because the label doesn't really matter. The intellectual label is not important. It's the emotion that comes with that label.
Okay.
You do feel grief is awful. I feel grief is lovely.
I feel good.
I love it when I get into my grief.
I love it when the grief's gone.
last.
It's a freeing feeling, but the facing it's
Yeah, no, I love the actual experience of grief
okay.
because it's a very aware place. Many of you might have noticed this already. When you start feeling your grief, sometimes you become very aware of its cause, and you become very aware of a lot of things around you that you weren't aware of
Yeah,
before
and
then.
I've experienced that. Yeah.
And for that reason, I feel grief is a very, aweful in the sense of awe-inspiring, full of awe,
That's good.
rather than an awful, a terrible experience. And this is one of the things we need to address with our view of pain. Our view of pain, particularly emotional pain, is very negative, particularly in Western society. If you go to some other societies, the view of pain is far more accepting. Like if you go to India or you go to Africa and go through the process of observing somebody who's gone through a bereavement, they'll often allow themselves to cry for 20 days, 30 days, and just really cry, for a long period of time until the grief is over, right? Here, what we do is we have a little snivel at the funeral, right? And then we have a little snivel at home when we're by ourselves, and a little snivel again. And the trouble is our snivels finished up being dragged out over years. And I've known some people who 20 years later, is the first time they actually fully grieve a bereavement that happened 20 years before.
Yeah.
Right? Now, if you think about it, that is because of the viewpoint of grief. It's how we see grief. In the Western society, we see grief as a very negative emotion. What's the very first thing that a doctor says to you when you're grieving? Have you ever been to a doctor while you're grieving? It's a very interesting process. How long have you been crying for? If you say it's any longer than a few hours, what's the next thing?
They prescribe you antidepressants.
They prescribe you an antidepressant. Yeah, exactly. Because our society cannot cope with any length of grief. This is why sales of antidepressants are so high, because there is such a focus on suppressing grief. Grief being the healing emotion. It's great when you get into grief because you're no longer in fear and you're no longer in addiction. You're now just feeling it, and now you've got a chance to heal. So the reality is that there is far safer for you than any other place if you engage that in a loving place. So I'm not suggesting you engage grief in an unloving place, which would be suicidal in its nature, which is more to do with an addiction than grief. Right? So what we need to do is address our grief, feel our grief, allow ourselves to feel it. But we also need to experiment with the truth before the truth can enter us. We cannot expect somebody to just tell us the truth and then we automatically accept it emotionally.
Okay.
It's impossible to do so. We need to actually personally experience it emotionally before we will personally accept it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Do you mind if you could just there's two types of grief.
I've
I've got to do with the aloneness and the loss of love. Is that what they are really?
Oh no, one was more to do with an addiction of a relationship. Like when you don't have a relationship, you then feel totally like your life's a mess because you don't have a relationship.
Okay.
And that is more to do with the addiction, which covers your fear. The fear is this terrible feeling you have that if you're alone, that nobody will ever love you, nobody ever wants you, you're going to be worthless and useless. And underneath that is a lot of grief associated with your parents' relationship, your relationship with your mother in particular.
Okay.
All right?
So I haven't quite gone there yet.
Yeah.
I'm still in the fear of the aloneness.
So when you go there, then a lot of the aloneness feelings will just dissipate anyway. But you also need to experiment with the truth. The fact is that you've got people around you who love you, care about you, want to be a part of your life. You just can't feel them.
Can I focus on the people on earth as well?
On earth and in the spirit world.
Yep.
You know, the people in the spirit world are great to focus on because God, firstly, has no emotional addictions with you. All right, people on earth do.
Okay.
Secondly, if your guide is on the divine love path, right, and usually there's a high likelihood they are if you've found the divine love path, then there's a high likelihood they won't feed your addictions either.
Okay.
So the relationship with them can be very healing in comparison to any relationship you have with anybody on earth.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
No worries.